say it was cocaine or something, having just like a little hit, like it's not going to kill you. No, it will, because you know what it's like to be on it, and you know that abstinence is sobriety. And so I like to talk about food sobriety. And food addiction has not received the actual recognition for so many years up until now, but now the tide is changing, it is shifting. We are starting to understand more about food addiction. It's a real thing, because sugar, if we know that sugar is more addictive in studies than cocaine, then we have to be able to acknowledge that if sugar is in food, then food can be addiction as well, and sugar addiction is real. And I know so many people who have experienced sugar and food addiction. And the other part to it is that, tobacco companies, I'm going to be doing an interview with Food Addiction Reset, and also Dr. Vera Tarman, who wrote Food Junkies, and we're going to be talking a lot about this on the podcast, a lot about food addiction and how it works. But a lot of people don't realize that hyper-processed, ultra-processed foods and just processed foods are engineered to be addictive. So they have a combination of sugar, of salt, of MSG, of fat, certain combinations that give us these dopamine rushes. And if the brain gets a hit of over 300 dopamine units at a time, it makes it an addictive behavior. And so, if you've ever experienced addiction to certain processed foods or sugary foods or high carb foods, those tend to be the ones that fit into this food addiction model. If you've ever experienced that, it's because it's a real thing. These foods are designed to addict you. And so if you've ever experienced a feeling of, not being able to just have one, cookie or one chip or one, spoonful of ice cream without needing to finish the whole, container, it's because it's designed that way. And so that's why I love talking about food addiction, is so many people don't understand that it's actually a real thing. And if you have experienced it and it's been something that you've battled in your life, like I have, being free of it and experiencing something like food sobriety is so incredible. It's so incredibly freeing. It's so incredibly exciting. Like the fact that I could just eat food, healthy, nourishing, real food, and then get on with my day and not be wanting things, not be focused on what I'm going to have later in the day for lunch or dinner. What am I going to have as a snack? When am I going to have my chocolate? When am I going to have this next treat, this, certain latte, or I was always preoccupied and fixated on when I was going to be able to have those things. And it takes so much energy to constantly be, thinking about that. And it takes away from your quality of life. It takes away from your productivity. It takes away from your relationships, because you're putting other things in your life ahead of connecting with other people. And that's another part that's kind of the, one of the big antidotes to being addicted to food is connection, seeking connection with yourself, connection with other people. And, one of the things that I noticed when I was at the Low Carb Universe conference is the last couple years, I go every year at the same time. And after dinner, I usually hang out for a bit, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to my room. I'm going to watch some shows or do some studying, and I'm going to have my chocolate. That's literally what I was thinking about at the end of the meal. And this time, because I had cut out chocolate before going, I didn't want to do that. I didn't even think about it. It didn't even occur to me. All I wanted to do was sit there, connect with my friends and all the wonderful guests who were there from around the world, and just sit and talk and connect for an hour or two after dinner. We were all just lingering there and connecting with each other and experiencing more connection with colleagues, more connection with friends, more connection with your family, the people that you care about. For me, my food addiction got in the way of that. I just wanted to be by myself enjoying the high that I would get from this dopamine rush of, having these addictive foods. And so being able to experience freedom from that and also connecting more with that has been so powerful for me. Sweet as, I don't know how to say the first part, Sweet Esfe does keto. That's a beautiful name. Thank you so much for discussing food addiction. You're telling my story. I'm almost in tears. I know you're going to make me tear up because I totally understand. I totally understand where you're coming from, and like that's really that's really why I'm trying to talk about it more. And I think that us all acknowledging it, I talked about it a lot in my book, in Keto Essentials. I talked about, is sugar a drug? Is food addiction real? And I don't know why it's kind of mocked or laughed at when, like, we think about alcohol is actually, very, very similar in terms of what effect it has on the body and what effect it can have. And it's actually, in many cases, liquid carbs. And so, I think that we acknowledge certain things like, yes, this is a real addiction. But food, and that's not an addiction. That's silly. Like, you can't actually be addicted to food, and yet you totally can. And in fact, a lot of foods are engineered to be hyper addictive. And so, I'm so glad that it resonates with you. And it's really why I'm talking about it, because for me to experience freedom from it is just, it's been so life-changing. I mean, I never thought that it was going to be possible for myself to ever experience that. So I want more people to be able to experience it too. And I think we really need to be dialoguing more about food addiction, about why it is that these foods are addictive, about how they're engineered to be addictive, about dopamine, and about how real food and eating real food can really help with overcoming and being free from food addiction and from sugar addiction. And ultimately that leads, to a much richer life. And if you are interested in some of the resources that I mentioned, there's a couple of great ones out there. So this book, Food Junkies by Dr. Vera Tarman, is excellent. I have it on audio, and it talks about those dopamine levels. So it talks a little bit about how, certain activities will generate, 100 to 200 units. Like sex, for example, generates 200 units of dopamine. It's a healthy behavior. It's meant to motivate us to reproduce as a species, but it's not going to be an addictive thing for most people because it's under 300 units of dopamine. But once you go above that, and the problem is so many things in nature now are so purified and refined. So, sugar cane in its natural form would never generate that much dopamine in the brain. But when you refine it and you purify it, it creates a level of dopamine release in the brain that we were never designed to have from a food. And that's why these foods become so addictive and hyper addictive, and that's why it causes food addiction. So that's one of my favorite books on it. There's an excellent podcast that Brian Sanders at Food Lies put out with an account here called at Food Addiction Reset. It's a really, really great account, probably the best one that's on Instagram about food addiction, and her name is Joan Ifland, and Brian Sanders at Food Lies. He has a podcast called Peak Human, and he did an amazing episode with her, and she just gets right into it. I mean, you understand all the behind the scenes of why